This is the Blaisin Access Podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. Today is Monday, March 24th. I'm Blaze Bryant. I hope you had a great weekend. I know overall it was pretty good for me because March Madness is one of my favorite sporting events of the year, as it's pretty amazing how over the course of just a few days, you go from 68 teams in March Madness when the field was selected the day before St. Patrick's Day. And here on Monday the 24th, we've gone from 68 teams all the way down to 16. 52 games have been played over the course of just a few days. It really is March Madness, and it has very much lived up to its name. Now, on to the mental health Monday part of this. We're going to talk about political uncertainty. Whoa, there's a lot of it, especially with this administration issuing all sorts of executive orders. And depending on where you are in the country, maybe your governor is just straight up freaking incompetent. Well, how do you deal with all this stuff? Thankfully, we get some tips and tricks. Anise Plinar is with the Therapy Explained YouTube channel. She is a therapist and mental health counselor who gives us a few tips.
Number one, validate your experience. Before we start really deep into this conversation, the very first step is to remember that the response that you're having, this anxiety, this stress, is normal. You're not overreacting, you're not being dramatic. It makes sense and it is rational to have an increase in anxiety and stress because of everything that's happening. When we talk about anxiety and stress in general, remember that anxiety tends to be triggered by a lack of control and a not knowing, right? It's the not knowing that then gets the anxiety to fill in all those blanks with the worst case scenarios and all the scary thoughts. But the difference in the anxiety that we are all experiencing now is that it is connected to our government. And the power difference here is astronomical.
Yes, it is, Anise. And it really is just so unfortunate that the federal government is, if they're not completely eliminating rights, they're making it a hell of a lot more difficult to enforce them. So that's the anxiety piece of this. And yes, anyone who says that you're being overly dramatic about what's happening, they don't know what it's like to be in your shoes. So you either have two options: walk the hell away from them, or say, hey, put on my shoes while I go build my resiliency toolkit. What does that look like, Anise?
We have had so many conversations about how important it is to have grounding tools and a variety of coping tools. So we're talking things like going for walks, journaling, yoga, meditating, doing puzzles, going into nature, resting, all of these things. It's important to kind of have them as hobbies and easily accessible activities so that you can help your nervous system feel a little bit more grounded.
Yes, it really is so important. Or in my case, adding on to those, I love catching a sports game. For whatever reason, sports grounds me very much. I've heard people refer to sports as the candy store of life, which I absolutely love that description because it really does take you away, or at least somewhat away from all the other stuff that's happening. And I'd love to know what's in your resiliency toolkit. Let me know on Facebook at Blaisin Shows. It's BLAISIN Shows. Anise goes on to further explain some other techniques to help us stay relatively sane in this politically difficult and insanity-causing time.
Part of your resilience toolkit will be to focus on the things that you have control over. So that is having plans for that worst case scenario if you have one in your head. What can you do to protect yourself and the people that you care about and or your community? Which leads me to my next point, but before I jump to it, part of it is having a community and a support system. So making sure that you are exposing yourself to people who think like you and who share your values will be helpful, because that reminds you that you are not alone in this fight. You don't have to fix everything and fight back at everything that is coming. Thankfully, there are also many people who think like you or similarly to you and want to protect their communities as well. So you don't have to do it all, and you're not alone.
This is so important, and I resonate with every single word of that, because admittedly, yes, I at times feel like I need to be the person who's trying to fix it all, even though I know that is mission impossible, as I hear the song in my head, the theme song, which I'll save my singing from you. But community is also so critically important, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, we are nothing without community and those shared values, because community really is the fuel that helps us get through this. Now, the last piece of this has to do with, in my opinion, the most difficult part of this whole thing, those good old boundaries.
Within the theme of self-care, there will always be room for boundaries. Boundaries are going to be extremely important in most of our mental health. So in this case, what I'm talking about is setting boundaries with the information that you are consuming. The balance between staying informed and not overwhelming yourself or triggering yourself will be different for everybody. So try to find what balance sounds like to you. Some questions to ask is, who are the sources that I am obtaining my information from? Do I trust these sources? And what are the times in which I actually need to be informed? That doom scrolling and constantly checking your phone may not be helpful. It is only increasing your levels of anxiety and stress, because there is no more news and you're trying really hard to obtain it.
Yes, and the whole thing about the news, I cannot start my day with news, especially with all this stuff that's happening, because at least until I log on for work at 8 o'clock in the morning, if I read news before that, or listen to news, I just get so damn depressed and just sad, wondering what hell kind of world am I living in here? It's absolutely ridiculous. This is coming from someone who still, to a degree, has a desire to cover news and do disability reporting and wanting to amplify those perspectives. And to a degree, I do that here on the podcast. I just am so concerned about how my friends in the media are being treated by the current federal administration, because if you call them out, they call you out for calling them out. It's just disturbing. Can we get back to some decent discourse between journalists and the presidency? I mean, it's not just exclusive to this current administration, because the political tensions between the press and the White House have certainly grown over the past few years, and frankly have been, in my opinion, one of the reasons why we're in this political divided hell to begin with, because the people we are trusting with the information are being told by their corporate figureheads to divide us rather than unite us, which has made things all the more challenging. It's just time that we get past all this crap, focus on where we agree, stand up for what is right and what's wrong, and that should be pretty basic. So I'd love to know your thoughts and what stood out to you here on Facebook at Blaisin Shows. It's BLAISIN Shows. Make sure you rate, review, and subscribe and share the Blaisin Access podcast. That helps it grow. Transcripts are AI generated and are not perfect, but they will give you a baseline sense as to what I'm talking about here on the show. For tomorrow's Trivia Tuesday, I wasn't able to pull off a guest segment just because work and life have been happening at a furious pace. But if you are a student of disability history, you may recognize the people we will be hearing from, all women, of course, because March is Women's History Month. We're going to amplify some women voices in the disability space. And for the transcript, what I'm going to do, because I don't want to give it away, I'm going to play a voice, and I will list off the choices for the voice. And your job will be to be the first person to get back to me with all three correct answers. And I promise you, I don't know when, but I promise you, you will get something from the Blaisin Access podcast, because I want to do something cool aside from just giving people bragging rights. So that's today's Mental Health Monday. I will talk with you on tomorrow's very different version of Trivia Tuesday. I'm Blaise Bryant. Thank you for listening to the Blaisin Access podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. Have a great day.